You see, when we think about narcissism, the first thing many people imagine is someone who's just arrogant or self-centered. But the truth beneath that shiny surface is far more fragile, far more vulnerable than most people realize. At the core of narcissism lies an ego that is painfully delicate. It's an ego built on illusions, on the desperate need to feel admired, validated, and superior, because deep down, there's a gnawing insecurity that they cannot face the moment they betray a super empath, someone who can sense their hidden motivations, someone who feels deeply and understands emotions intuitively. That fragile construction of self begins to crumble. But here's the critical point. Instead of confronting the truth of their actions, instead of facing the guilt and shame they have generated, the narcissist instinctively recoils. Accountability becomes almost impossible because it threatens the very foundation upon which they have built their identity. When a narcissist acts in ways that hurt others, they often do so without the capacity to fully internalize the pain they have caused. It's not that they lack awareness entirely. They can recognize consequences. They can see anger and disappointment. But the moment that recognition touches the depths of their ego, it triggers a kind of psychic alarm. Their mind tells them, "This is too dangerous. This could shatter me." And so, instead of embracing accountability, they erect defenses: denial, rationalization, projection. Every explanation they give, every excuse they formulate, serves the same purpose: to protect that fragile sense of self. They don't do this consciously in most cases. It's an automatic response, almost instinctual, a survival mechanism for their wounded inner child that never learned how to face vulnerability. Now contrast this with the super empath, someone whose very being is attuned to truth. A super empath doesn't just react emotionally. They feel, they process, they reflect, and their responses are calibrated to the emotional reality of the situation. When a narcissist betrays such a person, the super empath perceives the subtle energies of deceit, the cracks in authenticity, the shadows of guilt that the narcissist tries so hard to hide. This is terrifying for the narcissist because their usual strategies, gaslighting, manipulation, charm, suddenly lose their effectiveness. For the first time, they are confronted with someone who cannot be fooled, someone whose emotional radar penetrates the armor they wear. And when that happens, the narcissist feels exposed in a way they are not equipped to handle. What often follows is a kind of internal fragmentation. On one side, there's the recognition, sometimes fleeting, of what they've done, the awareness of the harm caused, the tiny spark of conscience that whispers, "You should have acted differently." On the other side is a fierce defensive reaction. The ego shouts, "No, it wasn't that bad. They overreacted. You didn't do anything wrong." This internal tug-of-war is exhausting because narcissists are rarely trained or conditioned to stay present with discomfort. Their nervous systems are wired to escape pain, to avoid the unbearable feelings that come with true accountability. So instead of sitting with remorse and learning from the experience, they engage in strategies to protect themselves: blame shifting, minimizing the betrayal, distracting themselves with external validation. It's important to understand that this is not mere stubbornness. This is a defense born from fear. The narcissist's psyche has never been nurtured in a way that allows them to tolerate vulnerability. From early experiences, often environments where emotional needs were unmet, ignored, or conditional, they learned that showing weakness or error would be catastrophic. So, over time, they built a psychological shell designed to avoid that catastrophe at all costs. But here's the tragic paradox. That very shell, meant to protect them, also prevents recovery. When they betray someone as attuned and emotionally perceptive, as a super empath, the exposure is so profound that it could have been an opportunity for growth. But the fear of dismantling their defenses outweighs any willingness to change. They retreat into old patterns rather than facing the internal truth. And in doing so, they trap themselves further. And this is why the concept of accountability is so foreign to the narcissist. For most people, accountability is a pathway to healing. It's painful, yes, but it also allows for reflection, understanding, and eventually, transformation. For the narcissist, accountability feels like annihilation. It feels like the collapse of the self they've worked so hard to construct. So even when they outwardly apologize or make gestures of contrition, these are often superficial. They might sound sincere, they might appear remorseful, but beneath the surface, the underlying fear remains. The real inner work, the honest, raw confrontation with their own failings, rarely occurs because it would destabilize the fragile ego. And this is why recovery is so elusive. True recovery after betrayal requires more than regret or external repair. It requires the courage to face the shadow self, to feel the full weight of harm caused, and to integrate that awareness into a new way of being. For the narcissist, the shadow self is a terrifying terrain they have long avoided. The super empath, by contrast, invites them into this space simply by being authentic and emotionally transparent. But instead of engaging, the narcissist often doubles down on avoidance. They seek to soothe their fear by redirecting attention, by seeking validation elsewhere, by rationalizing that the super empath misunderstood or overreacted. The opportunity for growth is present, yet inaccessible, trapped behind the walls of a fragile ego that cannot tolerate its own reflection. So what we see here is a profound psychological truth. The narcissist cannot recover in the way we typically imagine. Recovery because the very structure of their inner world resists the conditions necessary for transformation. The betrayal of a super empath is a turning point, a moment that could catalyze profound insight. But without courage, without willingness to feel vulnerability, without the capacity to stay with discomfort, the narcissist remains stuck in cycles of self-protection and avoidance. And sadly, this isn't about malice. It's about fear. It's about survival mechanisms gone awry. It's about the absence of early emotional scaffolding that could have taught them how to engage honestly with themselves and others. So when we observe a narcissist after betrayal, we must see them with both clarity and compassion. Clarity because we recognize the patterns that prevent true accountability. Compassion because we understand the woundedness beneath the arrogance, the fear beneath the bravado, and the fragility beneath the mask. But we must also acknowledge the reality. Until they are willing to face that fear, to dismantle the egoic defenses, to sit with the shame they instinctively avoid, true recovery will remain out of reach. And the super empath, by their very nature, illuminates this impossibility with such precision that there is no hiding, no evasion, no shortcut to healing. In the end, the fragile ego is both the prison and the barrier. It protects, but it also traps. And until the narcissizee can step into that vulnerability without fear, they cannot step into recovery. The betrayal has already exposed the weakness, but it also shows the path they cannot yet walk. It's a truth that is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Some wounds cannot be undone from the outside. The healing must come from the courage to face oneself fully, and that courage is often absent in the narcissistic psyche. And that is why, even when they wish to recover, the narcissist remains caught in a cycle they cannot escape. A cycle that begins and ends with the fragile, unyielding ego. When we talk about super empaths, it's important to understand that we are not speaking simply about people who are sensitive or nice. A super empath is someone who experiences the world in a profoundly different way. They don't just notice emotions on the surface. They feel them as though they were their own. They intuitively perceive the invisible currents of tension, fear, and desire in a room, in a conversation, in the subtle exchanges between people. This heightened awareness is not a skill they learn from a class. It is a natural wiring of their nervous system, an attunement to the emotional truth around them. And when a narcissist enters into a relationship with someone like this, the dynamic is immediately intensified. The empath senses everything, and the narcissist for the first time is confronted with a mirror that cannot be distorted. A super empath is capable of noticing the smallest inconsistencies in words and actions. They can feel when someone's heart is not fully present, when a gesture is performative rather than authentic. To the narcissist, who relies on charm, misdirection, and carefully curated impressions, this is a frightening reality. Their usual tools for maintaining control, manipulation, minimization, gaslighting, are often ineffective because the super empath perceives the underlying truth with almost surgical precision. It's as if the narcissist is suddenly standing in a room full of glass walls. Every attempt to hide, to manipulate, to conceal is visible, transparent, undeniable, and this perception is not just cognitive, it is deeply felt. The super empath experiences the emotional energy of the narcissist in real time. They sense the tension, the anxiety, the subtle undercurrent of guilt, and they respond not with judgment alone, but with a complex mix of intuition and empathy. This is not a weakness. On the contrary, it is a form of emotional intelligence that the narcissist cannot match. While the narcissist is often operating from a place of self-protection and self-interest, the super empath operates from connection, attunement, and resonance. This creates a profound imbalance in the relationship, one that the narcissist can neither fully understand nor easily navigate. The amplification of awareness that a super empath brings is both a gift and a mirror. It illuminates the narcissist's patterns, their compulsions, their blind spots, and their betrayals. Every attempt at deception or concealment is felt immediately, often before it is even consciously recognized by the narcissists themselves. This is why the betrayal of a super empath is such a pivotal event. The moment the narcissist violates the trust of someone so emotionally attuned, they are instantly confronted with the magnitude of their action. The empath feels the hurt deeply, the loss of trust, the rupture of connection, and the narcissist cannot hide from it. But there is more than just confrontation here. The presence of a super empath exposes the narcissist to a level of accountability that is rare in their lives. Most people can be deceived, manipulated, or pacified with charm or persuasion. But the super empath is resistant to illusion because their percepte is grounded in emotional truth rather than appearances. They are like a compass pointing to the true north of feeling, and the narcissist cannot ignore that guidance. For the narcissist, this is profoundly destabilizing. The usual strategies for maintaining their self-image fail, and they are forced into a space they are unequipped to inhabit. The space of raw, undeniable emotional reality. This is why relationships with super empaths are simultaneously transformative and threatening to narcissists. Transformative because, theoretically, they offer a mirror that could catalyze insight and growth. If the narcissist were capable of true introspection, if they could tolerate vulnerability and shame, the presence of a super empath could serve as a guide to deeper understanding. But for most narcissists, this opportunity is too terrifying. The mirror is too clear, the emotional exposure too intense, and the confrontation with their own shadow too threatening. They recoil, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively, and they revert to old defense mechanisms. It is important to recognize that the super empath does not provoke this response intentionally. They are not here to punish, manipulate, or control. They are simply living authentically, experiencing emotions fully, and responding to the reality of the interactions around them. The narcissist, however, has never been equipped to handle this level of authenticity. They are used to bending reality, shaping perception, and avoiding the depth of feeling that would force them to confront themselves. The empath, by existing in a state of truth and sensitivity, unwittingly becomes a catalyst that exposes the narcissist's inability to recover, to reconcile, and to genuinely take responsibility for their actions. The dynamic between a narcissist and a super empath also reveals something fundamental about the nature of healing and connection. Healing is not simply about words or apologies or surface-level actions. It is about presence, attunement, and emotional integration. The super empath embodies these qualities. They are not just aware of what is happening externally. They are deeply engaged with the internal emotional landscape of both themselves and others. For the narcissist, this is disorienting because it challenges the very foundation of their defensive structures. The exposure is not just cognitive. It is felt in the nervous system, in the gut, in the chest. It is a visceral recognition of what has been lost, what has been broken, and what they cannot repair simply through charm or manipulation. This is why betrayal feels so catastrophic when a super empath is involved. The narcissist may have betrayed others with impunity, slipping through relationships with minimal consequence, but the super empath experiences, internalizes, and radiates the truth of that betrayal in a way that cannot be ignored. The emotional resonance is amplified, not diminished. The narcissist may attempt to rationalize, distract, or deflect, but these efforts are like trying to hold back a tide. They are ultimately futile. The empath's awareness is too acute, too precise, too deeply connected to the emotional currents that the narcissist cannot access or control. And so, the presence of a super empath becomes a kind of natural boundary, a force field of emotional truth that the narcissist cannot bypass. They may try to recover superficially, to patch the damage with apologies or gestures, but they cannot bypass the deep emotional awareness that the empath brings. This awareness is both illuminating and unrelenting, and it forces the narcissist into a confrontation they are rarely prepared to face. It is not punitive, it is simply a reflection of reality, the unvarnished truth of their actions, laid bare by someone whose emotional perception cannot be swayed or softened. In the end, the super empath amplifies the narcissist's awareness not through intention, but simply by being who they are. Their presence magnifies emotional truths, exposes deception, and creates a mirror that reflects not just the narcissist's actions, but the inner fragility that drives those actions. And for the narcissist, this mirror is terrifying because it reveals a reality they are not equipped to face: the undeniable impact of their betrayal, the depth of harm caused, and the impossibility of recovery without genuine self-confrontation. The gift of a super empath is profound. They illuminate the truth. They hold emotional space. They experience connection fully. And the tragedy for the narcissist is that while this truth is visible, accessible, and undeniable, they cannot yet step into it without fear. Until they can, their path to recovery remains blocked, and the betrayal leaves a wound that is both inescapable and unforgettable. No charm, no explanation, no rationalization can change the clarity of the empath's perception. It is the unwavering presence of truth that makes recovery impossible for the narcissist, and that, ultimately, is the power of the super empath. They see, they feel, they reflect, and in doing so, they show the narcissist the depth of what they have lost in a way that cannot be denied, avoided, or undone. When we speak about the cost of emotional exploitation, we are not merely talking about a fleeting discomfort or a temporary rupture in a relationship. What happens when a narcissist betrays a super empath is a profound upheaval, a seismic shift in the emotional ecosystem of both people involved. The empath experiences pain and disillusionment at a depth that is almost ineffable, but the narcissist also experiences a different kind of loss. One that is often invisible, booed to the outside observer, yet devastating in its own way. The bond between a super empath and a narcissist is unlike most other connections. For the narcissist, the empath is a source of understanding, attunement, and validation that they have rarely encountered. This is a person who sees them, who feels them, who provides a reflection that feels them, who provides a reflection that feels both safe and illuminating. When that bond is broken through betrayal, the narcissist faces a void that they cannot easily comprehend, let alone fill. You see, emotional exploitation is not merely an act of self-interest or manipulation. It is, in many ways, a violation of trust at the most intimate level. Super empaths operate from a place of openness and vulnerability. They invest deeply in the connection, often before the narcissist has even recognized the depth of the relationship themselves. The empath's ability to give so fully is what makes the relationship so valuable. But it is also what makes the betrayal so catastrophic. When the narcissist acts in ways that exploit or harm the empath, they are not only betraying the other person's trust, they are severing a source of emotional nourishment that has fed them, sometimes for years. This loss is subtle, but it is real. The narcissist may not immediately recognize it because they are accustomed to taking without considering what is being given. But a super empath's bond is not a transactional one. It is a living, breathing connection. When it is violated, the narcissist experiences a strange form of emptiness. It is not simply guilt. They may not even feel the full weight of remorse, but it is an absence that cannot be compensated by superficial gestures, flattery, or diversion. The very energy that once sustained them, that sense of being understood and seen, is no longer available, and there is no replacement for it. And this is where the cost becomes most evident. Unlike ordinary relationships, a super empath's bond amplifies awareness, meaning the narcissist cannot ignore the consequences of their actions for long. They may attempt to distract themselves with external validation, to fill the void with accomplishments, possessions, or the attention of others. But these are only temporary measures. The emotional gap left by the betrayal is persistent. Every interaction with others, every reflection in a mirror, reminds them, often subconsciously, that something essential has been lost. It is a wound that is not visible but felt, an absence that cannot be mended with the usual tools they have relied on in the past. Furthermore, the cost of emotional exploitation extends beyond the individual narcissist to the dynamics of future relationships. Betraying a super empath is not a minor misstep. It is a breach that carries lessons the narcissist is often ill-equipped to internalize. They may experience fleeting insight, a moment of recognition, that their behavior has consequences, but without true self-reflection. These lessons remain superficial. Over time, patterns of exploitation and betrayal repeat because the narcissist has not learned the deeper truth, that trust, once broken with someone attuned to emotional reality, leaves a mark that cannot be erased. The empath's insight, their capacity to feel and reflect, ensures that the narcissist cannot simply move on as if nothing happened. It is important to recognize the depth of the empath's experience here. The super empath is not only aware of the betrayal, they feel it in layers that extend beyond conscious thought. They sense the intentions behind actions, the subtle energies of manipulation, the inconsistencies between words and feelings. This means that the narcissist's behavior cannot be hidden or minimized. Every attempt at apology, every gesture of reconciliation is felt with full clarity by the empath. They can detect sincerity, or the lack of it, instantly. And when the narcissist cannot match that level of authenticity, the emotional cost of exploitation becomes magnified. The narcissist experiences not only the absence of connection, but also the impossibility of recreating it artificially. The nature of this loss also exposes something crucial about human psychology. We underestimate the profound impact of emotional connection on our well-being. The narcissist, for all their self-focus, depends on the empath's attunement more than they may realize. The empath's presence provides a feedback loop, a mirror that validates and stabilizes the narcissist's internal world. When that mirror is shattered, the narcissist faces a form of destabilization that they cannot correct with logic, control, or distraction. This destabilization is both a consequence and a warning, an indication that recovery is not possible without genuine transformation and awareness. And yet, many narcissists attempt to bypass this reality. They try to recreate the connection through charm, apology, or manipulation, hoping that surface-level gestures will suffice. But a super empath is not fooled by superficiality. They feel the difference between genuine remorse and performative action. The cost of betrayal, therefore, is not only in the lost connection, but in the impossibility of restoring it without authentic change. The narcissist is confronted with the truth of their limitations. They cannot simply undo the damage by trying harder, apologizing more, or offering more attention. The emotional economy here is far more complex than they can manage. because it is based not on transactions, but on resonance, authenticity, and mutual attunement. The cost of emotional exploitation also teaches us something vital about the nature of responsibility. While the narcissist team may avoid accountability, the consequences are unavoidable. The empath's emotional intelligence ensures that the betrayal reverberates through the narcissist's life in ways that are subtle but profound. Their internal world, their self-perception, and their future relationships are all affected by the rupture. Every time they encounter someone who senses their inner truth, every time they are confronted with an emotionally attuned presence, they are reminded of the loss. The cost is enduring because it is tied to the fundamental way in which they relate to the world and to others. This is why recovery for the narcissist is so challenging. The emotional cost is not something that can be remedied with external fixes. It requires deep introspection, self-awareness, and the willingness to face the consequences of one's actions fully. Without this, the narcissist remains trapped in a cycle of exploitation and loss, unable to repair the damage or regain what was lost. And for the super empath, the betrayal leaves an imprint that is both protective and clarifying. They become more aware of boundaries, more attuned to authenticity, and less willing to be deceived in the future. Their emotional awareness amplifies the cost of exploitation, ensuring that the narcissist cannot escape the consequences of their choices. Ultimately, the cost of emotional exploitation is not merely a matter of lost trust or temporary discomfort. It is a fundamental rupture in the relational and emotional fabric of the narcissist's life. It is a reminder that connection, attunement, and authenticity are not commodities to be taken lightly. Betraying a super empath carries consequences that reach far beyond the immediate moment, echoing into the narcissist's psyche in ways that they cannot control. The loss is profound, not only because the empath is irreplaceable, but because the very structure of the narcissist's emotional world has been challenged and destabilized. And so, the reality becomes unavoidable. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, they are not just hurting someone else. They are confronting a void they cannot fill, a truth they cannot face, and a loss that cannot be undone without profound transformation. The cost of emotional exploitation is both personal and relational, subtle and enduring, and it highlights a fundamental truth. Betrayal has consequences that no charm, excuse, or manipulation can erase. The impact is permanent, and the path to recovery is one that requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to step into the very vulnerability that the narcissist has spent a lifetime avoiding. The cost is not abstract. It is lived, it is felt, it is real. And that is why the narcissist cannot simply move on. The wound remains, the loss remains, and the consequences of emotional exploitation echo far beyond the moment of betrayal, shaping the very fabric of what is possible in their life and in their relationships. When we consider the narcissist's journey after betraying a super empath, it becomes clear that one of the greatest barriers to recovery is the repetition of chronic patterns. These patterns are not just habits, they are deeply ingrained ways of being, ways that have been reinforced over years, sometimes decades, by early experiences of unmet needs, conditional love, and unresolved trauma. A narcissist's behavior is rarely random. It follows a script that is both protective and limiting. Every act of manipulation, every effort to control, every instance of emotional self-protection is part of a pattern that has been rehearsed countless times, often unconsciously. And this is why, even in the aftermath of betrayal, change is so elusive. The patterns are so familiar, so automatic, that they override any fleeting moments of insight or remorse. What makes these patterns so potent is that they are linked to survival. In many cases, the narcissist learned early on that self-preservation depended on appearing strong, perfect, or unflappable. Vulnerability was unsafe. Authenticity was risky. So over time, behaviors that reinforced a sense of control and superiority became hardwired. These patterns become almost like a second nervous system, guiding responses automatically, without conscious thought. And when the narcissist betrays a super empath, someone who sees through deception, who senses manipulation, who feels the subtleties of emotional reality, the familiar patterns are triggered again. Even when the narcissist briefly recognizes the harm they have caused, their default response is to revert to what has always worked for them: deflection, justification, rationalization, and control. The challenge here is profound, because true change requires something far more difficult than simply acknowledging wrongdoing. True change demands that a person interrupt deeply ingrained patterns and step into unfamiliar territory. The territory of emotional responsibility, authentic vulnerability, and sustained self-reflection. For the narcissist, this is terrifying. The patterns they rely on are predictable, safe, and protective. Stepping outside of them is akin to walking on a tightrope without a net. It is not surprising, then, that even when they recognize the opportunity for transformation, they often retreat back into the comfort of old behaviors. The cycle repeats, and the betrayal remains unresolved at its deepest level. A super empath amplifies the difficulty of this dynamic, because they do not accept surface-level gestures or superficial apologies. They sense when the narcissist is genuinely engaged with change and when they are merely performing. This heightened perception exposes the limitations of the narcissist's habitual patterns. Even the most carefully constructed charm or rationalization falls short. The empath can feel when the narcissist is operating from their familiar script rather than from true insight or accountability. This is both illuminating and destabilizing. For the narcissist, for the first time, the usual patterns that have protected them and allowed them to navigate the world with relative ease are ineffective. The familiar strategies no longer work, and yet the capacity to engage differently, the capacity to break the patterns, is not yet developed. Breaking these chronic patterns is not a matter of willpower alone. It requires a profound engagement with the underlying emotional and psychological structures that support them. The narcissist must confront fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities that they have spent a lifetime avoiding. They must sit with discomfort, rather than fleeing from it. They must experience shame, guilt, and regret, not as threats, but as signals for growth. And this is precisely what most narcissists are unprepared to do. The familiarity of the old patterns offers comfort, even if it perpetuates harm. The unfamiliar terrain of authentic change is intimidating, uncertain, and emotionally risky. The repetition of patterns also explains why recovery after betrayal is often uneven or incomplete. The narcissist may show moments of insight, brief periods of apparent remorse, or gestures that suggest understanding. But without sustained engagement with the underlying structures that drive their behavior, these moments are fleeting. The old patterns reassert themselves almost inevitably. The empath senses this immediately, and the disconnect becomes palpable. The narcissist may believe they are attempting change, but the patterns embedded in their nervous system and psyche act like a gravitational pull, pulling them back toward familiar behaviors. This is why relationships with super empaths are so revealing. They show the narcissist exactly where their capacity for growth is limited and where their habitual responses dominate. Moreover, these patterns are often reinforced by external factors. The narcissist may have cultivated environments or social circles that validate their behaviors, that reward charm, manipulation, or avoidance. These reinforcements make it even harder to step outside the patterns, because doing so threatens not only internal comfort, but also external acceptance. True change, then, requires both internal courage and the willingness to risk external disruption. The narcissist may feel trapped between the need to preserve their established self-image and the impossibility of genuinely repairing the harm caused. This tension keeps them stuck, cycling between attempts at surface-level repair and inevitable relapse into old patterns. One of the most tragic aspects of this dynamic is that the narcissist may genuinely desire to change. They may feel the weight of loss, the absence of the empath's attunement, and the consequences of betrayal keenly. But desire alone is insufficient. Without the tools, insight, and willingness to confront the unconscious scripts that govern behavior, they cannot escape the cycle. True change requires an extraordinary level of introspection and emotional courage, qualities that the narcissist has often avoided cultivating because vulnerability has always felt unsafe. And yet, the presence of a super empath creates the conditions for a mirror of possibility. The empath's clarity, emotional depth, and sensitivity illuminate what is missing in the narcissist's behavior. They show, not through accusation but through presence, what authentic connection looks like. But here's the paradox. The mirror is available. The opportunity for insight is visible. Yet the narcissist remains limited by the inertia of their chronic patterns. They see what is possible, but they are unable to fully step into it. This is the fundamental tension that defines the post-betrayal landscape. Ultimately, the lesson here is profound. The difference between chronic patterns and true change is not trivial. Patterns are protective, familiar, and limiting. True change is unfamiliar, risky, and transformative. For the narcissist, stepping into change is a confrontation with the very fears and vulnerabilities they have spent a lifetime avoiding. The empath's presence illuminates this gap with precision, making it impossible to hide or rationalize away. And until the narcissist can step outside the gravitational pull of their habitual behaviors, recovery remains incomplete, relationships remain fractured, and the cost of betrayal persists. The cycle of chronic patterns versus true change reminds us that human behavior is deeply conditioned, and that transformation is not simply a matter of intention. It is a process, a journey into discomfort, a willingness to confront the self with honesty and courage. The narcissist may wish for recovery, may seek forgiveness, and may attempt gestures of reconciliation, but the patterns that define them will resist these efforts unless they engage with a deeper work of self-reflection, vulnerability, and authentic transformation. And so, when we observe the narcissist after betraying a super empath, we see not just a failure of morality, but a reflection of the structural limitations of their psyche. The patterns that have protected them also prevent true growth. Until they are willing to face this, to step into discomfort, to confront their vulnerabilities, they remain bound by repetition, unable to truly recover or repair what has been broken. The power of chronic patterns lies in their invisible. They feel automatic, necessary, familiar. But the possibility of true change lies in awareness, courage, and the willingness to break free. And until the narcissist takes that step, the consequences of betrayal remain, echoing through the relationship, the psyche, and the very fabric of their emotional world. The patterns can be observed, understood, and described, but they cannot be circumvented. Recovery demands engagement with the deepest layers of self, and until that engagement occurs, the cycle continues. And that is why, even when a narcissist seems willing, change is often elusive, incomplete, and insufficient. The patterns hold them in place, and the cost of betrayal endures. One of the most significant obstacles to a narcissist recovery after betraying a super empath is not merely a lack of accountability or repeated patterns. It is emotional immaturity. Emotional immaturity is subtle. It does not always look like childish behavior on the surface. Often, it is masked by charm, intelligence, or even apparent success. Yet, at its core, it is the inability to regulate emotions, tolerate discomfort, and empathize authentically. Emotional maturity is the capacity to recognize one's own feelings, take responsibility for actions, and respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. For the narcissist, these capacities are underdeveloped, often stunted by early experiences, where emotional needs were unmet, dismissed, or conditional. The betrayal of a super empath exposes this immaturity in the most profound way, because the empath's perception is so acute that it mirrors back every deficit the narcissist is trying to hide. When a narcissist acts from emotional immaturity, they are rarely aware of the full impact of their behavior. They may sense that something has gone wrong. They may notice tension, anger, or disappointment, but they lack the internal tools to process these feelings constructively. Instead, They externalize blame, rationalize their actions, or minimize the harm they have caused. To the super empath, this is immediately apparent. Every attempt to evade responsibility, every superficial apology, every excuse resonates as inauthentic. The empath can feel the gap between intention and action, and this amplifies the consequences of the betrayal. Emotional immaturity, in this sense, does not just block recovery. It magnifies the harm done because it prevents the narcissist from meeting the empath in the space of truth and accountability, where real healing could occur. Emotional immaturity also manifests as a fundamental avoidance of discomfort. Growth is always uncomfortable. Facing one's failings, acknowledging pain caused to another, and experiencing guilt and shame are essential components of transformation. For most people, these emotions are not pleasant, but they are navigable. For the narcissist, however, discomfort is intolerable. Their nervous system is wired to escape the vulnerability that comes with genuine reflection. They may deflect, distract, or attack, all in an unconscious attempt to protect themselves from the raw feelings they cannot tolerate. This avoidance blocks any possibility of authentic change because it prevents the narcissist from fully engaging with the consequences of their betrayal. The super empath, by contrast, feels everything with clarity, creating a stark contrast between the narcissist's immaturity and the empathy's emotional presence. Another aspect of emotional immaturity is the inability to integrate feedback. Growth requires the capacity to receive criticism, observe one's impact, and adjust behavior accordingly. A narcissist often interprets feedback not as information, but as threat, as judgment, or as evidence of personal inadequacy. When confronted by a super empath, who insights are often precise and deeply intuitive, the narcissist feels exposed. Their instinct is to reject, rationalize, or manipulate the situation to maintain a sense of control. This defensive posture prevents them from truly learning from the experience. The opportunity for transformation exists, but emotional immaturity acts as a barrier, keeping the narcissist in a cycle of superficial apologies, repeated betrayals, and unfulfilled attempts at reconciliation. What is particularly striking is how emotional immaturity affects empathy itself. The narcissist may believe they can empathize. They may say the right words, perform gestures that suggest understanding. But emotional immaturity prevents authentic resonance. True empathy requires the capacity to sit with another person's suffering, to feel it without defensiveness, and to respond with integrity. Emotional immaturity blocks this process. The narcissist may intellectually comprehend that they caused harm, but they cannot feel it in a way that transforms behavior. The super empath senses this immediately. They feel the dissonance between expressed remorse and internal reality, and this dissonance highlights the narcissist's inability to grow. This immaturity also perpetuates cycles of self-deception. The narcissist may tell themselves that they are working on themselves, that they are making progress, that the relationship can be restored. Yet, without emotional maturity, these efforts are often performative. They lack the depth necessary to truly confront the impact of betrayal and integrate lessons learned. The super empath experiences this as inconsistency, as a lack of alignment between word and action. The betrayal leaves a wound precisely because the narcissist is not equipped to process, acknowledge, or repair it fully. Emotional immaturity ensures that the pattern continues, that recovery is stunted, and that the relational rupture persists. It is also important to note that emotional immaturity is not a moral failing. It is a developmental one. Many narcissists developed coping strategies in early life to survive environments where emotional attunement was absent or conditional. They learned to protect themselves through control, performance, and self-interest. Because these strategies were adaptive in a context of neglect or conditional love. What we see in adulthood, the avoidance of responsibility, the inability to tolerate discomfort, the superficial gestures of apology, is the continuation of survival mechanisms that have become rigid patterns. The betrayal of a super empath exposes the limits of these mechanisms in a way that no previous relationship, may have done. The narcissist is confronted not only with loss, but with their own underdeveloped emotional capacities, which they often have never had the opportunity to cultivate. The contrast between the narcissist and the super empath is stark. The empath's emotional depth, sensitivity, and attunement make them capable of perceiving and feeling the full weight of relational dynamics. They are capable of holding themselves and others accountable, of integrating complex emotional information, and of responding with integrity. The narcissist, in contrast, struggles to meet these emotional demands. The betrayal highlights the immaturity that has been hidden or masked in other contexts. The empath's presence magnifies what is missing: the ability to tolerate discomfort, to feel remorse, to integrate insight, and to act from authentic understanding, rather than self-protection. And this is why the path to recovery is blocked. Emotional immaturity prevents the narcissist from engaging with the relational and emotional reality in a way that could foster true repair. They may desire reconciliation, but desire is not enough. They may attempt gestures of apology, but gestures without depth cannot heal the breach. The empath feels the gap between surface-level effort and internal capacity, and the narcissist is forced to confront a truth they are often unprepared to face. That emotional growth is not a performance, but a disciplined engagement with self-awareness, vulnerability, and authenticity. In the end, emotional immaturity is the hidden architecture that sustains betrayal. It is not simply about selfishness or cruelty. It is about the inability to meet oneself and others fully in the emotional landscape. The narcissist cannot fully recover because the structures that govern their emotional responses are underdeveloped. Until they cultivate maturity, the ability to feel, to tolerate, to integrate, and to act with genuine empathy, the cycle of betrayal, avoidance, and superficial repair will continue. The super empath, in their clarity and sensitivity, illuminates this reality with unflinching honesty, making it impossible for the narcissist to hide from the consequences of their immaturity. And so, the truth becomes clear. Emotional immaturity is not incidental. It is foundational. It blocks growth, it magnifies harm, and it ensures that recovery is incomplete without deep and sustained transformation. The narcissist may wish to heal, may attempt gestures, may express remorse, but until emotional maturity is cultivated, the breach remains, the patterns persist, and the consequences of betrayal continue to reverberate in every interaction. The path forward requires courage, self-reflection, and the willingness to confront what has long been avoided. Until that happens, emotional immaturity ensures that recovery is not just difficult, it is often impossible. When we talk about shadow work, we are delving into a part of ourselves that most of us instinctively avoid. The shadow is very thing we repress, deny, or disown. The emotions, fears, impulses, and vulnerabilities that we've been taught, consciously or unconsciously, to hide from ourselves and others. For the narcissist, the shadow is enormous, filled with the parts of themselves they cannot tolerate: inadequacy, fear, grief, shame, and longing for connection. The betrayal of a super empath brings the shadow into stark relief, but instead of engaging with it, the narcissist usually recoils. They have spent a lifetime avoiding these uncomfortable truths, and the confrontation with their own inner darkness feels unbearable. Yet it is precisely here, in the shadow, that the possibility of genuine transformation resides. Without shadow work, recovery is impossible, because the underlying forces that drive betrayal, manipulation, and emotional avoidance remain untouched. The first challenge of shadow work is courage. It is terrifying to face the aspects of yourself that you have long denied. For the narcissist, these are not minor insecurities. They are the very vulnerabilities that, if acknowledged, would threaten the carefully constructed image of self-sufficiency and superiority they rely upon. The shadow whispers truths that are uncomfortable, that they were hurt, neglected, or unseen. As children, that they have acted selfishly or cruelly, that they are deeply afraid of being exposed or abandoned. Confronting these truths requires humility, introspection, and the willingness to sit with profound discomfort, qualities that the narcissist has rarely cultivated. They are used to shielding themselves from these feelings, turning them into anger, blame, or deflection. Shadow work asks them to stop running, to stop protecting, and to meet these truths with honesty. The super empath's role in this dynamic is illuminating, because their presence naturally triggers the shadow. They feel, sense, and reflect the hidden aspects of the narcissist, whether the narcissist wants to acknowledge them or not. When the empath reacts with clarity and authenticity, the narcissist is forced to confront what they have tried to suppress, their lack of integrity, their dishonesty, and the pain they have caused. The empath's emotional depth acts as a mirror, reflecting back the shadow with precision. This is both an opportunity and a threat. It is an opportunity because it presents a clear path to self-awareness, but it is a threat because the narcissist is unprepared to tolerate the exposure. The shadow becomes a place of fear rather than insight. Shadow work is not about intellectual understanding alone. It is not sufficient for the narcissist to say, "I see I hurt someone." Real shadow work requires full engagement with the feelings, patterns, and unconscious motivations that underlie behavior. It means exploring why betrayal occurred, what insecurities drove it, and how old wounds shape their responses. For a narcissist, this is uncomfortable on multiple levels. First, there is the fear of vulnerability. Acknowledging the shadow may feel like admitting weakness. Second, there is the difficulty of self-reflection. They must observe themselves without defensiveness, without rationalization, and without projection. This is almost entirely unfamiliar terrain, because most of their lives have been spent avoiding exactly this kind of honest introspection. Moreover, shadow work reveals the interconnectedness of past trauma and present behavior. The narcissist may betray the super empath out of fear, neediness, or impulse, but these actions are rooted in unresolved wounds from earlier life experiences. Perhaps they learned that love was conditional, that showing vulnerability was unsafe, or that emotional needs were disregarded. These early experiences created patterns. Automatic responses designed to protect them, but patterns that ultimately harm both themselves and others. The shadow contains these origins, and engaging with it allows them to trace the connection between past and present, between inner pain and outer behavior. Yet this tracing is not easy, because it requires them to feel, to remember, and to face truths they have long suppressed. Another critical aspect of shadow work is the recognition of projection. Narcissists frequently project their unwanted traits onto others, blaming, accusing, or interpreting others' behavior through a lens of fear and self-preservation. Shadow work exposes these projections, revealing that the traits they see in others often reflect the parts of themselves they cannot face. In the context of betrayal, this becomes particularly evident. The narcissist may accuse the empath of being too sensitive, overreactive, or unreasonable, yet these judgments mirror their own unacknowledged capacity for harm. Confronting the shadow means recognizing this projection, owning the disowned parts, and learning to integrate them rather than externalize them. This process is painful and unsettling, but it is essential for authentic change. Shadow work also demands patience and persistence. The narcissist cannot expect to confront the shadow once and emerge transformed. It is a continual process of self-exploration, reflection, and integration. Every time they encounter a trigger, every time the empath reflects on uncomfortable truth, the shadow offers another opportunity for insight. Yet, without commitment, the narcissist defaults back to familiar defenses. They rationalize, avoid, or distract themselves, and the opportunity for growth slips away. This is why shadow work is rarely easy or immediate. It is a lifelong practice of self-awareness and honesty. Importantly, shadow work is not about punishment or self-condemnation. It is about understanding, integration, and liberation. The narcissist must learn to meet the shadow with compassion, to recognize that the disowned parts are not enemies, but pieces of the self that have been neglected or denied. By engaging with these aspects honestly, they can begin to break free from the patterns that drive betrayal, defensiveness, and emotional avoidance. They can move toward authentic accountability, genuine empathy, and meaningful relational repair. Without this engagement, however, recovery remains impossible. The betrayal of the super empath leaves a wound that cannot be healed superficially because the underlying forces remain untouched. Finally, shadow work highlights the paradox of transformation. The very aspects of self that the narcissist fears, the vulnerability, the shame, the inadequacy, are the keys to authentic growth. Confronting the shadow is difficult because it demands humility, courage, and emotional honesty. Yet these are exactly the qualities that allow recovery to occur. The super empath, by being present, attuned, and authentic, illuminates the path but cannot force the narcissist to walk it. The choice to engage with the shadow must come from within, and it requires the willingness to face what has been avoided for a lifetime. In the end, shadow work is the gateway to genuine change. It is the bridge between betrayal and recovery, between denial and accountability, between patterns of harm and authentic relational connection. The narcissist may desire reconciliation, may attempt gestures of apology, and may express regret, but until they meet the shadow with honesty and courage, these efforts remain incomplete. The super empath's presence amplifies this reality, making the shadow impossible to ignore, and the path to healing both visible and unavoidable. The shadow is not a punishment. It is an invitation. It asks the narcissist to face the hidden truths within themselves, to integrate what has been disowned, and to step into a deeper awareness of self and others. Until they accept this invitation, recovery remains out of reach, and the consequences of betrayal echo endlessly. The shadow is where transformation begins, and without it, the narcissist cannot heal. And so, the truth is unavoidable. The shadow is not the enemy, but the doorway. The choice to step through it determines whether recovery is possible or forever elusive. The path is difficult, but it is the only way forward. When we consider the betrayal of a super empath by a narcissist, one of the most profound truths is that the impact on the relationship is often irreversible. This is not to say that people cannot repair connections in a superficial or functional sense, or that communication and compromise are impossible. But at the level of deep trust, authenticity, and emotional resonance, something essential has been broken, something that cannot be fully restored. The super empath experiences connection at a depth most people cannot imagine. Their capacity to feel, sense, and reflect emotional truth creates a bond that is intimate, subtle, and profoundly alive. When the narcissist betrays that trust, they do more than hurt the empath. They shatter the very foundation of the relational structure that made genuine connection possible. The rupture is immediate and palpable. The empath feels the betrayal not only in response to the overt action, but also through an intuitive awareness of intent and consequence. They sense the deception, the avoidance, the emotional manipulation that the narcissist may attempt to conceal. This awareness magnifies the harm because the empath's nervous system is attuned to subtleties that the narcissist may not even realize are being perceived. The betrayal, therefore, is not a singular event. It is an accumulation of observed, sensed, and felt ruptures. Every lie, every omission, every act of avoidance resonates at multiple layers, creating an emotional imprint that is indelible. One of the key reasons this impact is often irreversible is that super empaths operate from a foundation of trust, integrity, and deep emotional engagement. They do not compartmentalize feelings or ignore inconsistencies. Every interaction is filtered through their heightened awareness of emotional reality. When that trust is broken, it is not merely the act itself that matters. It is the recognition that someone they believe to be attuned, caring, or authentic has violated the relational covenant. Once this realization occurs, the empath cannot unsee or unfelt what has happened. The emotional landscape of the relationship has been altered, and the bond cannot return to its previous state. For the narcissist, this irreversibility is a devastating consequence, though it is often difficult for them to recognize immediately. They may assume that charm, manipulation, or apology can restore the relationship to its prior condition. They may attempt to gloss over the betrayal, minimize the harm, or seek validation from other sources to replace the connection they have disrupted. But the super empath experiences these attempts with clarity. They perceive the difference between superficial gestures and genuine engagement. They can feel when the narcissist is attempting to patch a wound, without actually addressing the underlying breach. And because the empath's perception is so precise, the superficial efforts often fail, leaving the narcissist facing the stark reality of the permanent consequences of their actions. The irreversibility is also tied to timing and pattern. Many narcissists repeat harmful behaviors without reflection or accountability. The betrayal of a super empath is rarely a singular incident. It is often the culmination of a pattern of manipulation, avoidance, and emotional exploitation. This pattern leaves a trail of emotional evidence that the empath perceives and stores. Even if the narcissist shows remorse later, the empath perceives and stores remorse later. The empathist's awareness of the historical context cannot be undone. Each breach adds to the accumulation of emotional truth, reinforcing the sense that the relational foundation has been compromised beyond full repair. Another critical aspect of irreversibility lies in the empath's boundaries and self-preservation mechanisms. Super empaths are deeply attuned, but they are not passive. They feel and reflect truth, but they also protect themselves once they recognize danger or harm. After betrayal, the empath instinctively recalibrates their boundaries. They may maintain interactions, but the depth of trust, vulnerability, and openness that characterized the relationship before the betrayal is altered. This is a natural adaptive response to violation, and it ensures that the narcissist cannot return to the prior relational equilibrium. The empath's recalibration is permanent because it is based on lived experience, insight, and emotional truth. Moreover, the irreversibility extends to the narcissist's internal world as well. The presence of the super empath once offered a mirror, a source of attunement, and an opportunity for growth. Once betrayal occurs, that mirror is fractured. The narcissist loses not only the connection, but also the unique insight that the empath provided. Their opportunity for reflection, feedback, and emotional resonance is diminished. They may seek other relationships, but few can replicate the intensity of perception and authenticity that a super empath brings. In this sense, the consequences of betrayal ripple outward, affecting both the relational dynamic and the narcissist's capacity to access the profound mirror that the empath represented. It is also important to note that irreversibility does not imply bitterness or failure on the part of the empath. In many cases, the empath experiences clarity, insight, and personal growth as a result of the rupture. The loss of trust teaches boundaries, discernment, and self-respect. It forces the empath to recognize the limits of what another person can provide and the necessity of protecting their emotional integrity. The narcissist may perceive this as rejection or punishment, but from the empath's perspective, it is a natural and necessary evolution. The relational foundation cannot be restored to its previous state, precisely because the empath has integrated the truth of what happened and adapted accordingly. This permanent shift also highlights the deep emotional responsibility inherent in relationships with super empaths. Their attunement is not a superficial advantage. It is a profound gift that magnifies both connection and vulnerability. When the narcissist betrays this gift, the consequences are felt with intensity and clarity. The empath's perception, insight, and emotional depth ensure that the betrayal cannot be forgotten or trivialized. The relational landscape is forever altered, and any attempt to return to normal without genuine change is doomed to fail. Finally, the irreversibility underscores a critical truth about human connection. Some breaches cannot be undone. While reconciliation, communication, or external repair may occur, the depth of trust, the authenticity of emotional engagement, and the sense of mutual attunement are lost in a way that cannot be fully restored. The narcissist may lament, attempt to compensate, or seek validation elsewhere, but the empath's experience remains intact. Their perception, awareness, and insight preserve the reality of the betrayal. In this sense, the impact is permanent, a living testament to the consequences of actions that breach trust and violate emotional truth. The profound lesson here is that relationships are delicate and sacred when they involve super empaths. Their presence brings clarity, depth, and authenticity that few others can offer. Betrayal fractures the relational fabric in ways that cannot be fully repaired. It is not a matter of punishment or retribution. It is a matter of consequence. The trust, attunement, and emotional resonance that once defined the relationship have been irrevocably altered. The narcissist may experience loss, emptiness, or longing as a result, but the empath has already integrated the reality of what occurred, and so the truth becomes inescapable. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, the impact is permanent. The relationship cannot return to its prior state, no matter how much charm, apology, or superficial reconciliation is attempted. The empath's awareness, sensitivity, and insight preserve the emotional truth of the betrayal, creating a shift that is irreversible. The depth of connection that existed before cannot be reconstructed, and the consequences of violation echo endlessly.